Guys, welcome to another episode of the Fantasyfootball podcast. Thanks for joining us on this Monday. I hope everybody had a great weekend. As always, we're with you guys on YouTube. Make sure, if you could be so kind, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe. Keep supporting us here on the Fantasyfootball podcast and help the channel continue to grow. We really appreciate it. Also, keep on the comments below the video, man. I get back to all of them. You guys are really smarter than I am. I love the comments. I actually learn stuff in the comments, and always the chat live and kicking. We always appreciate that. All right, but let's turn into a little business real quick. This show has a different spin today, a little special. Dolphins did sign Zach Sealer to an extension. They added 3 more years to his deal. Fair deal, I think, for the team and for Zach. Good to take care of one of their own. Good on the field and off the field, a culture setter, a culture kind of changer, a pillar in the Dolphins locker room. So good to get that done. But we'll talk about that on our next episode on Wednesday. Today we're kind of gonna shift gears a little bit. Not totally. We'll talk Dolphins, but especially we're gonna talk fantasy football. So everybody get their pad and notebook, pull the chair up. I know Jason and I are, because we have our Fins Faithful fantasy draft, I think, this Saturday. So everybody, have your ears close to the screen here and your eyes, and nobody better to do it, to break down sleepers, rookies, draft strategy, key Dolphin players. Who should you draft from the Dolphins? And we have Dave Kluge from Footballguys.com. Dave, thanks for joining us. One of the best in the business, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this is always a good time. Jason, I mean, it's been like 5 years now since you and I connected. And I mean, like, I don't know how many times I've reached out to you over the years, like, hey, kind of what's going on in Miami? Like, what's the scoop that you're getting here and there? So I always appreciate you being available. And George, nice to meet you as well. This is always really fun getting to go on these kind of fan podcasts and just getting a different look at the team than what we're hearing from the national media.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Dave. We've had a fun similarity with living through Jay Cutler. But
yes.
Besides that,
and Adam Gase.
And Adam Gase, of course. But yeah, no, you're terrific at what you do over at the Football Guys, so we appreciate the time.
Yeah, and you speak of, it's fun for us to get an outside perspective from the team. Before we get into specific fantasy guys, let's talk about your perspective of the Miami Dolphins on the field. Kind of, they've lost some veterans through trade. They added Fitzpatrick. They added some late veteran corners here. Your kind of thoughts on the Dolphins organizationally and Mike McDaniel, and just kind of your forecast for them this upcoming season?
So I want to be careful how I say this, because I don't want to like immediately come on your show and just make a bunch of enemies in the comments. That's not what I'm trying to do at all.
Oh, no worries about that.
Don't worry, it won't happen here.
So, I had been critical of Tua Tagovailoa when he was coming into the league, and I made a lot of enemies in Miami because of that. And now I do think that we're at the point where it is kind of a make or break season for Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa. For better or worse, these guys are tied to each other. Tua Tagovailoa was struggling just to get on the field and get consistent snaps before McDaniel showed up there. And then Mike McDaniel obviously turned him into, what we've seen in flashes, looking like one of the best quarterbacks in the league for little stretches here and there. But the inconsistencies have just been impossible to ignore. The highs have been really, really high, but it's just so hard to predict when those highs are going to come and when they're going to play well. And then we've seen it, over the last few years where they just kind of flame out at the end of the season. So this is kind of a take that I've been hearing from guys not in Miami, is that, and I don't know how you guys will react to this, but that the team kind of got soft, maybe, that they put so much effort into playing fast and trying to make these explosive plays that they lost the grit you need on an NFL team. And you saw some guys weren't playing through injuries the way that they might have previously. And it's really tough to make that assumption, because I don't know what's going on in these players' heads, and I'm not interviewing them one-on-one, but you see a lot of injuries piling up, guys taking off more time than you'd expect from some of these injuries, not playing with the aggressiveness that you'd expect. And then, of course, just trying to get the ball out of Tua Tagovailoa's hands so quickly. It almost seemed like they were catering around, this fear of Tua getting injured again. And it really just took the explosives out of the air. So I don't know what you guys are hearing in Miami, but talking to friends from outside of Miami, talking to some national reporters, talking to some of the fantasy analysts we have on staff on Football Guys, that's kind of the big picture look right now at the Miami Dolphins.
That's very accurate, Dave. There's been this whole talk about a culture shift or change, or at the very least, an attempt to it. And you make valid points. And this is kind of a make or break year for both Tua and McDaniel, and also the mindset of, look, let's see this culture change. But there are shades and glimpses that it is happening. And of course, as George mentioned, the extension of Zach Sealer is keeping players home. So hopefully that could send a good message to those trying to get that second contract or extension or what have you. But you hit the reality of it. But now let's talk the fantasy of it. This is the perfect time to pick your brain.
Good stuff to talk about. It's the fantasy players in Miami for sure.
I just want to add something, Dave, before you jump in. I think that's why we like this draft they had with Savi and I and Grant. Yeah. I think they knew that issue. And yes, you're right on the soft label. So yeah, and the culture change, we'll see if it's real or not. And your opinions on Tua. Look, I think Tua is a floor raiser, Dave. I think you have a floor with Tua. The question is how high the ceiling is. But right. I will say he hasn't thrown. I think he just threw his first pick in practice. He's locked in. He's playing at an elite. He's playing. I think he'll play at an efficient level. The thing with Tua is going to be the health, Dave, and that's what it comes down to. But anyways, sorry, I just wanted to get that in there. Jason, go ahead.
Well, the Dolphins have a potential first rounder in running back Achane, one of the best dual threat runners with receptions and carrying the ball. What is your assessment of him? What's your capability? What do you think his capabilities are? And what's his ADP? Let's talk draft position.
Yeah, I mean, his ADP is in the middle of the second round. I've got him as my RB4. I think he should be going at the end of the first round. This is a guy that I am way more bullish on than I think the public is. And, I do these NFFC drafts, these high stakes drafts. And one of the things that you can do is pick where you want to pick from. And then they do it Kentucky Derby style. So when I'm picking these, I'm doing one tonight. I picked 12th and 11th as my preferred draft spots because at the end of round one, you can still get a Brian Thomas Jr., a Ladd McConkey, Drake London, one of those guys. And then Achane is just sitting there at the top of round two almost every single time, and it's such an easy pick for me to make. What I really like, and I'm going to talk about this point again when we get to another player on the Dolphins, is guys who have shown that they have more than one path to elite production. And Achane, he's not a product of the system. He's not a one-trick pony. What we saw his rookie season is that he was one of the most efficient and best rushers in the NFL. And then in year two, Raheem Mostert out of the picture. Like I said, they started kind of game planning around Tua's injury a little bit, and they started getting the ball out of his hand quickly. And then we see another blow-up season, this time as a target magnet out of the backfield. So I don't think that things need to break right for Achane to be good in fantasy. Whether the offense gets back on track and looks like the offense 2 years ago, or whether it's still similar to the offense they ran last year, we've seen multiple ways for Achane to have elite finishes. So right now, I've got Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, and Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Achane, and then I prefer him ahead of Ashton Jeanty, ahead of Christian McCaffrey. Just the floor and ceiling with Achane are both so high. So whether Jaylen Warren gets a little bit, or Jalen Wright gets a little bit more involved, whether he maintains his role as a pass catcher, there's just so many different ways that Achane can score that he's a priority target for me early in drafts.
Well said. And one thing I want to throw out, I'm going to throw this out every chance I can. Achane was averaging 6 receptions with Tua a game. Obviously, Tua misses several games. He would have, if you average that out, would have finished around maybe 100 receptions. Do you think there's a chance that he could actually hit that century mark from a reception standpoint?
If Tua was healthy for 17 games, absolutely. I mean, it was a world of difference. You look at his splits with and without Tua Tagovailoa last year. He was averaging over 23 points per game with Tua, less than 9 points per game without him. So even that, if Tua has to miss, hopefully if they have to, go to Zach Wilson or whoever it is, then I'd expect to see some of that rushing efficiency. They're not going to be trying to get the ball out of Tua's hand in 1.2 seconds like they were last year. Then we can see him rush a little bit. We see that Achane is best when he can get outside in a zone run scheme. And that's something that they haven't really done as well since they lost some of that interior offensive line a couple of years ago. But still, all he needs is the opportunity. And we saw a lot last year was between the tackles, short catches near the line of scrimmage. But I'd like to see them get back to what he does best as a rusher, which is allowing him to get outside, stick that 1 foot in the ground and cut up field where nobody is going to be able to catch him.
Yeah, and plus, the Jonnu Smith catch has got to go somewhere, right?
Right.
They lost Jonnu. I know they brought in NWI, but he hasn't been great in camp, and I don't know how exactly much he fits this offense, actually. So that's to be considered. And plus, I think Achane's the best way they used him was in 23. I don't think this guy – what number are you comfortable – because I think he loses efficiency actually when he gets higher number of carries. I think if he gets 10 carries versus 15, he can actually be more productive. But what number would you expect when you see, okay, this is where I'm comfortable with Achane getting carry-wise? Or is it just touches in general?
I mean, I'd like to see him around like 120 to 150 carries with somewhere between 80 to 100 targets. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later in the show, I'm sure, when we talk about some sleepers. But Jalen Wright, man, I loved Jalen Wright in college. Was a big fan of the little glimpses that we saw last year, and we saw that this running game was at its best when Raheem Mostert could handle the early down stuff and the goal line stuff. And I think if they put Jalen Wright in that role, he's got explosive abilities that Raheem Mostert didn't at that point in his career. And then keeping Achane a little bit fresher, we could see him going back to being that hyper efficient player that he was his rookie season. So I don't know what you guys are hearing out of Miami or how touches have been split up throughout camp, but I think that this entire offense could be a little bit better when they have a two-headed backfield and keeping Achane fresh for those explosives.
Yeah, well, as far as the running game, I mean, the only thing about Wright is he's got to hold on to the ball. He's got some fumble issues. It's been rearing its head in camp a little bit. And actually, the guy who's been kind of impressive, I was out of camp a few times, is not a big fan, but it's Alexander Matheson, who's obviously starting this league. He's got experience. He's actually looked good in camp. And then you have Ollie Gordon, who the rookie, not really I would say a fantasy guy at this point, but in the short yardage, he's come on since the Pats come on. But yeah, this is Achane's backfield. The question is who kind of takes hold of that number 2 spot. It's Jalen Wright's job to lose, I would say. But anyways, let's talk about some guys that I did a draft and I was surprised. The Hill Waddle debate. I did a draft, Dave, and Tyreek kept falling and falling. I'm saying, do people not know what this guy is capable of, especially with the injury last year? Who's got better value, and why is the drop? Is it because of just last year and kind of the controversy around him and the team? Who's got better value for you, Hill or Waddle?
So if you're looking in a vacuum, I do prefer Tyreek Hill. I've got him a couple of spots ahead of Jalen Waddle in my rankings. But when you start looking at the value, the way that you propose this question, Tyreek Hill is going in round 2 or 3. Jalen Waddle has often fallen in around 6 or 7. And because of that draft price, Jalen Waddle is one of my most drafted players. I think when you're looking at the expected production and the draft day value, I think Waddle is one of the most mispriced players in drafts right now. And similar to what I was just saying about Achane, about kind of 2 different ways of giving elite production, both as a rusher and as a target magnet. We saw something kind of similar with Jalen Waddle, where year 1, the efficiency left a lot to be desired, but he was operating as the wide receiver 1, and he was getting these short looks near the line of scrimmage where he could create after the catch. Of course, year 2, Tyreek Hill shows up into the picture. Then we see things change a little bit. The volume dipped, but that year, the first year with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle was without question the most efficient player in the NFL. I mean, you look at his yards per route run, you look at his yards per target, you look at everything that he was able to do on the opportunities he was given. He was just unbelievably efficient. And then what we've seen over the last 2 years is that the efficiency and the usage are starting to tighten up a little bit. He's still getting elite usage. He's still an elite efficiency player. The biggest problem over the last 2 years has strictly been injuries, and there really hasn't been anything outside of that. Even the games that he does play, he's so oftentimes limited because he's dealing with a back issue or an ankle issue or whatever it may be. So I am of the belief that Jalen Waddle is a top 12 wide receiver, and injuries are the only thing that have really kept him at bay. So this year, looking at it, I don't know if Tyreek Hill is going to fall off the age cliff. I don't know if we saw last year was just kind of a sign of things to come, or if it was just a fluky year dealing with that wrist injury. I don't really know what's going to happen, but whether it be alongside Tyreek Hill or whether it be as the number 1 wide receiver in Miami, I think that Jalen Waddle easily has a path to being a top 12, top 10 player this year.
Yeah, I got good news for you, Dave. He's looked fantastic in camp, Waddle. He's kind of, Jason, I don't know if you would agree, he's kind of slowly shifting into that number 1 target role. I don't know if it's, people speculate the kind of relationship with Tyreek and Tua, but aside from that, I think it's kind of a good thing because he's the future of that position, Dave. So, yeah, that's good. And I just want to say, we're talking, remind everybody, we're talking with Dave Kluge from Footballguys.com. Make sure you guys smash the thumbs up, smash the subscribe button here on YouTube. We appreciate it. Dave, when it comes to fantasy, is as good as it gets.
1,000%. And to go back to Jalen Waddle, obviously that college chemistry to the pros, that's going to be continuing as he signed that huge extension. So he is going to slide into that 1A number 1 receiver probably next year. You never know, maybe a little sooner, whatever may happen. The business of football is surprising sometimes. But, of course, those 2 receivers will go as Tua Tagovailoa will go, as we've seen the difference. But where do you see Tua going? Where are you potentially selecting him? And what do you ultimately expect from Tua Tagovailoa this year?
So, when it comes to drafting I got to be honest, in single quarterback leagues, I just can't get there. Super flex leagues or best ball leagues where you're doing 3 quarterback builds, I think there's a good reason, but there are 3 red flags in Tua's profile that just kind of push him off my board when it comes to single quarterback leagues. One, the injuries, and I know everybody gets injured, but you guys are, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Tua has dealt with some injuries over the last couple of years, and when he's not out there, it does make it tough just, searching the waiver wire for another guy. 2 is we've seen late in the season, there has been, not the same level of play that we see early in the year, and especially in fantasy football, those late season games are so much more important. So I've actually started something over the last couple of years where I'm targeting the Jared Goffs and the JJ McCarthys, the guys who are playing in domes late in the year, or Baker Mayfield, the guys that's playing in South Florida and gets a lot more warm weather games. And then the other thing is rushing upside. Russia showed some legs when he was at college, but as the injuries have started to pile up, he just doesn't rush the ball that much. So he could have his huge games, where he can throw for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, and those are great weeks. But when he doesn't do that, he doesn't have the rushing upside that gives you a nice floor. So if he doesn't have a very efficient game as a passer, you can be looking at a 6, 7, 8-point outing from Tua Tagovailoa. That's never something you want in your QB spot. So there is a big disparity between real life football value and fantasy football value. And I think when it comes to how Tua Tagovailoa could operate this offense, he's one of the most valuable quarterbacks out there. I mean, like we've seen this offense does not do what it does with and without Tua Tagovailoa. But when it comes to real life football, the lack of rushing upside just really does kind of make it tough to draft him. So there's a lot of guys that I think, Tua Tagovailoa, much better quarterback than Justin Fields, but in fantasy football, where points matter and we're playing this game of math trying to project stuff, Justin Fields, he can throw for 100 yards and 1 touchdown, but if he's getting another 100 and another touchdown on the ground, he's going to outscore Tua even on his best weeks. So Tua Tagovailoa, good real life quarterback, but it's really hard for me to get there in fantasy.
Yeah. I always struggle with the real life kind of GM stuff, and then can I take this player over this player? I wouldn't do it if I was the general manager of the team, but fantasy wise, because we don't want, trust me, Dave, we do not want to see Tua taking off football in his hands at all. But I want to stick with the quarterbacks real quick. Strategy-wise, I always struggle when to take the quarterback. Who's the first one to take him? Then the run starts. Where do you believe that quarterback – are you one of those, I'm taking the first quarterback? Are you let everybody have that run? I'll sit back and take Jordan Love. You know what I mean? Or something like that.
That's where I'm at this year. Like, I want to be the last player to draft a quarterback in almost every single draft that I'm doing. It's just we've seen the quarterback landscape has changed so much over the last few years. Of course, last year's draft class, I'm not the biggest believer in Caleb Williams, but still gave us a pretty good baseline last year, especially with the rushing upside and being in a good offense. Of course, J.J. McCarthy now stepping into the Minnesota offense. Drake May has some rushing upside that we like. Michael Penix is playing in a great system now in Atlanta. And then Jaden Daniels, of course, you're not getting him at a discount, but for me, when you look at the top quarterbacks, it's so hard for me to pay up for these guys, knowing the value that I can get late in drafts. So what I've been doing this year more often than not is being the last guy to take my first quarterback, but then I'll take a second quarterback just to kind of double my chances of hitting on this year's league winner. Now, when I draft, I walk out of a draft, let's just say hypothetically, Drake May and Dak Prescott. I don't know assuredly that I'm going to be starting one of those 2 guys for the rest of the season, but I know there's going to be guys on waivers. I might have to play streaming matchups, whatever it may be. But there are so many guys that are going to go undrafted in your single quarterback leagues that your draft is going to end. And there might still be a Jordan Love or JJ McCarthy or Jared Goff, Cam Ward, Bryce Young, all these guys that have very high ceilings that are going to be sitting out on the waiver wire. So I see people fall into this trap. I've already done about 150 drafts this offseason, and I know what happens. People get their 3 wide receivers, they get their 2 running backs, they get their tight end, and they say, okay, now I need to fill in that quarterback spot. When the reality is this year, you should be adding more wide receivers and more running backs. Like, I am okay getting 4 or 5 guys on my bench before I'm even looking at my QB1 spot. So a lot of other guys are paying up for what I kind of see as like the dead zone quarterbacks this year, Baker Mayfield and Bo Nix. I will let my league mates draft those guys, knowing that I could still plug in these injury-away running backs or these young, exciting wide receivers, and then just patch a quarterback room together either in the very final rounds or on the waiver wire after my draft.
I love hearing you say that. I'm not at 150 at all, but I'm around 20 best ball drafts, and my most popular duo right in that middle is Baker and Bo Nix. So I'm rolling with those two as like kind of my duo, and I'm really glad that you are confirming that strategy.
Yeah, and the one I like even more is you can kick it down another 2 rounds past Baker Mayfield and Bo Nix. I really like the Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert. One, you've also got, the guys that you could stack with late if you want to take a risk on a Quentin Johnson or Keandre Lambert-Smith or Cavante Turpin, where you can kind of add in these other guys from the office really cheap at the end of your draft. But yeah, and it's just, everybody has their guys that they like. I've heard some other really sharp guys saying that they like trying to leave every draft with Caleb Williams and JJ McCarthy, the lure of the unknown with these young guys. But you can just look down the list of quarterback rankings this year, and you get to like quarterback 24, 25, 26, and you still could feel good about these guys on a weekly basis. It's really once you get all the way down to like the Tyler Shuggs and the Aaron Rodgers that you might start sweating it a little bit.
Yeah. I'll give myself a little. I drafted Jalen Daniels and Bo Nix last year at the end of the draft, and I rode Jalen Daniels all the way to second place. My brother got first place, but we'll get him this year. I always
that's
say
like
this.
Cam Ward. Cam Ward, this year's rookie. Yeah. Like he's being left for dead in fantasy drafts. It's crazy here. Like people just aren't drafting him at all. He's got some nice moxie as a rusher. He could end up padding his floor with another 500-600 yards as a rusher. And I feel like it's like CJ Stroud 2 years ago. Like everybody was just out on CJ Stroud for whatever reason. And then he finishes QB8 that year. And like, I think that is very possible for Cam Ward this year.
Yeah. I like Drake May this year a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Actually a lot. Everybody cover your ears in the Fantasy Faithful League. All right. So let's, I want to say something. I've always had this theory, and it's probably obvious, but I wanted to get your thoughts. Somebody who's, really into this fantasy stuff and is what you do. I always have this conversation with my buddies. I say the goal is to, the goal in fantasy football drafts is find the guy you drafted in round 5 through 8 that the next year he's going in the first or second round. And if you've done that, you're going to see yourself in the playoffs and maybe in the championship. I think that's the key to a draft. Your thoughts on that real quick? I mean, it's just something I've always said.
Yeah, I think that's like on the money. Last year, like you said, Jaden Daniels was going round 10, and now he's going as the third quarterback off the board in most drafts. Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas last year, both kind of fallen into those middle rounds or both first-round picks this year. And I feel like really where you can hit on those picks are on the rookies. And there has been a lot of talk about rookies getting steamed up higher than they should be. Sure, Achane Genty is going at like the 1-2 turn. And if you don't want to pay up for that, I get it. But there's still like Omari and Hampton going in round 3, Travis Hunter going in round 6, Tetaroa McMillan going in round 5. There are still rookies this year that could make immediate impacts, be top 5 players at their position that you're getting in the middle rounds.
Yeah. I guess let's stick with the rookie class.
Yeah.
Since we're there now. Well, your thoughts on these rookies? I know it wasn't a big skill, receiver-wise, didn't love this draft, but there are some guys out there, and obviously Genty you talked about. I, for one, think Genty's getting drafted a little too high. Give me some of the rookies that you like and guys you would target in these, I guess first 5 rounds or beyond.
Yeah, so I'll skip over all the guys that got drafted in round 1. I think when you look at Achane Genty, Omari Hampton, Tetaroa McMillan, Travis Hunter, Emeka Egbuka, Matthew Golden, I think these guys are all going to make year 1 impacts. And I mean, especially Egbuka and Golden, they've been getting a lot of buzz out of camp. Tetaroa McMillan fits the exact need that the Carolina Panthers need for that prototypical X receiver. Genty and Hampton, obviously we know good players on good offenses. I'll go a little bit deeper here. And the first guy isn't like super, super deep, but Trey Harris was just like my guy in this draft class. I was in love with him. And when I start my process, I always start by looking at the numbers. And I had to like rub my eyes and make sure I was reading this right when I saw that Trey Harris had over 5 yards per route run last year at Ole Miss. I mean, one of the best analytical profiles we have ever seen before. And there's this narrative swirling around that he was just kind of a product of that Lane Kiffin offense, that he didn't really do anything special, that he was schemed up to get wide open. So I dug deeper into it, and I watched 4 years of tape on Trey Harris. And early in his career, he was kind of a gadgety player that needed to be schemed open, and they'd hit these pick plays for him where he'd be able to get out in space. But what we saw last year was a big change in his ability to just beat press man coverage. And I looked, his amount of contested target opportunities last year, based on the amount of routes that he ran, almost doubled, or I'm sorry, almost cut in half, which to me signals that he was separating almost twice as much last year as he was through the first 3 years of his career. Now he lands on a team that I think there are some good wide receivers. I mean, obviously Ladd McConkey's in a tier of his own in this Chargers offense, but I think Quentin Johnston, we've seen the big plays, we see the athleticism here, but I think Trey Harris just such a complementary skill set to what Ladd McConkey does that he can really entrench himself as the number 2 option on the team. We're looking at 93rd percentile athleticism, and then also something that gets swept under the rug a lot in fantasy discussions is that he was one of the best blockers in this draft class. So I looked on PFF. There were 534 non-offensive line players that logged at least 100 run blocking snaps last year. Out of those 534 players, Trey Harris ranked 8th in PFF's run blocking grade. So that is a good way for rookies to get on the field early. If you can contribute in the run blocking game, then you've got a role immediately. And then those run blocking snaps turn into routes. Those routes turn into targets. Targets obviously turn into fantasy points. So Trey Harris is a guy that I've been drafting very, very aggressively. One other name I'll throw out there, and this is a 7th rounder. I had him ranked as my RB6 before the draft, and he fell a little bit because of his age. But Taj Brooks is just a guy that I really, really, really like. Yeah, out of Texas Tech. The more I watch him, the more I like him. And a lot of people are going to look at the 40-yard dash and look at the age and get a little bit concerned. But when it comes to running backs at the combine, there's only 2 drills that I care about, and it is the 3-cone and the shuttle drills. He hit 95th percentile scores in both of those. He's got quick feet. He knows how to mitigate losses when he gets hit in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage. He can keep the pile moving. And now you look, Zach Moss just got waived by the Cincinnati Bengals. And Chase Brown is a day 3 running back that we saw last year get thrusted into a big role and became a league winner. Basically, the way that I'm looking at it is Taj Brooks is just a Chase Brown injury away from being this year's Chase Brown. He's a guy who can handle a huge workload, just a really, really talented runner on a good offense. So I don't think there's a lot of opportunity there as long as Chase Brown is healthy. But the injury away contingency upside, you can get Taj Brooks in round 20 of your drafts right now. And I'm not kidding when I say that if Chase Brown gets injured, we're going to be looking at Taj Brooks as a plug-and-play top 10 weekly running back.
That is a scream of a handcuff if I've ever heard one. And do you use that strategy often for your 1st or 2nd round running back? Is that something that you put on your strategy?
So I like to be a little bit skeezy when it comes to running back handcuffs, and I like to take the running back handcuffs of other people's players because then it just means that I have even more opportunities. I think if you're handcuffing your running back, it does give you some safety here. But even if I don't have Chase Brown, I am A-okay taking Taj Brooks because what happens then is if Chase Brown gets injured, then I just stumble into a top 10 running back. And whether I put him in my lineup, put him in my flex spot, or put him out on the trade market, there's value to be had there. So almost always when I'm drafting, I do like the late round quarterbacks and I like to save some of those late picks for quarterbacks. But more often than not, I'm spending 4 of my last 5 or 6 picks on these injury away guys. So obviously, the Taj Brooks is the one that I mentioned, but there's also Trey Benson and Blake Corum and Jalen Wright, who we talked about a little bit earlier. There are all these guys. Ray Davis is another one. If James Cook has to miss any time, you know what you're getting from him. So I really like to have these guys that have no projectable volume, but are basically just scratch off tickets that if they hit, they're going to hit huge. And the reality is that when you're drafting these wide receivers in round 17, 18, 19, 20, the very end of your draft, these guys probably aren't going to hit. You're looking at Darius Slayton and Ray McLeod and these guys that you might get a usable week from here and there in best ball, but especially in managed leagues, I want to get as many of those injury away handcuffs as I possibly can.
That is a chess, not checkers mindset. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, no, that's great. A strategy, I never thought about that. Like if you have Taj Brooks, Chase Brown goes down, the owner who had Chase Brown is going to be looking for Taj Brooks, and you already have him. So that's a great point by you. One other rookie, are you buying into the RJ Harvey hype, or is that a little too rich for you?
So RJ Harvey was another. I wanted to talk about him. I talked about him so much pre-draft. I was just obsessed with his film at UCF, and then he tore up the combine. And when he got landed in Denver, I mean, my soul left my body. I was so excited. That was just like a dream matchup for me. That being said, again, I talk about pass blocking and run blocking, something that a lot of fantasy analysts don't really care about. He was a 10th percentile pass blocker last year. He was one of the worst running backs coming into the league as a pass blocker. So you look in Sean Payton's offense, we've seen 28 opportunities over the years where running backs have had 50-plus targets in a single season. And I think people just assume that all of that work is going to go to RJ Harvey. But if he can't pass block, he's not going to be able to get on the field on third downs. They need somebody out there that can protect the quarterback. in steps J.K. Dobbins. He's one of the best pass blocking running backs in the league. So I think people might have this a little bit flip-flopped where they see R.J. Harvey, this spark plug that caught passes at UCF and can rip off big plays, and they assume that he's going to be kind of the Alvin Kamara in the offense. I think it's more likely that he takes on some of the early down work where he does have the speed, where he can rip off big plays, and they got a good offensive line there. And the threat of Bo Nix as a rusher is going to open up even more opportunities and rushing lanes for him. I think that R.J. Harvey could still have a good year. But again, looking at value here, R.J. Harvey's going in the 3rd or 4th round. J.K. Dobbins is regularly falling into the 8th, 9th, 10th round. And I think that if we're looking at the guy most likely to be the pass-catching back in Sean Payton's offense, I think it's probably going to be Dobbins instead of Harvey.
Interesting.
Very interesting point. I've been liking Harvey, but now there's a little bit of pause there, but I'm going to make sure to get Dobbins if I do have Harvey. I like the handcuffs.
And I love Harvey too. Don't get like I said, he was one of my favorite prospects in this year's draft class, but that the inabilities as a pass blocker, it's something they've already talked about in camp, that he has a lot of work to do there. This is an undersized guy who came into college as a quarterback and actually had to switch from quarterback to running back. So he's still learning the position. The athleticism is undeniable. I mean, he's just a freak out in the open field, but I think it might take him a little bit of time before he can fully get up to speed as an NFL back.
Very fair, very fair. And I love the analytics that you threw out, specifically with the Trey Harris numbers and all those, no block, no rock kind of mindset.
Right.
Absolutely.
Sounds like a Dolphin receiver.
That's what I'm right. I mean, Mike McDaniel loves to have everybody get in the mix with blocking. But another analytic that I think was really telling from a rookie last year in Miami and hoping that there's going to be a quantum leap in year 2. Looking outside of Waddle and Hill and Tua Tagovailoa and Achane, are there any other Dolphins? I'm going to throw a name out. He was the number 1 route win leader last year in Malik Washington. And in the last 4 games of the season, take this with a little bit of grain of salt, he quadrupled his targets in production. He went from basically 1 target and catch to like 4 or 5. So what are your thoughts about Malik? I mean, I'm seeing him way, way, way at the end of a best ball draft, but do you think he has a chance to make some noise this year?
Absolutely. I think, you talk about Jonnu Smith being gone too. And Jonnu Smith was taking so many of those short touches near the line of scrimmage. I think that's where Malik Washington can operate best. So outside of the big names, I already talked a little bit about Jalen Wright. I really like him, but Malik Washington is a guy, and it's tough because there's almost no projectable volume there. When you start looking at where the looks are going to go, it's very much so. This pass game revolves around Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, but I think anything left over could go to Malik Washington. And I was actually going to wait till the end of the show to ask you guys, because most projections favor Nick Westbrook-Ikhine right now, and I can understand, he had the touchdowns last year, but I don't think he's a great fit in the offense. You look at guys that can make plays after the catch, guys that are violent pass blockers, guys that can cut across the middle of the field and gash defenses. That's what Malik Washington does best. So I was hoping that the Jonnu Smith trade would open up an opportunity for Malik Washington. But from what I've been paying attention to the reports coming out of Miami, I haven't heard too much buzz yet. So have you guys heard anything about that I might be missing?
You want
Go ahead, George.
Well, we got good news for you. NWI, we got good news. We said it from the beginning. I'm not sure. I think between the 20s is where Malik Washington is going to be more effective than NWI, because this offense is trust-based. Tua throws to a spot, not necessarily the receiver. So you got to be quick, shifty, get off the line, beat the DB to the spot. That's not NWI. He's more of a red zone kind of target. I think in the 20s, in the red zone, the goal line, there you'll see NWI a little bit. But I think the leader in the clubhouse, no doubt, is Malik Washington for that third receiver. And I think you'll see some of those stuff that those catches we said got to go somewhere. All those Jonnu catches got to go between, sprinkling some Achane, sprinkling some Wright, sprinkling more Malik. Honestly, there's an undrafted rookie, big receiver I like as much as NWI in camp. That's Theo Weiss. That was Luther Burden's teammate. And he was a big receiver who was really good after the catch for a big guy, and also has a little vertical get. But I think, yes, your point is kind of on the money. I don't know if you would agree, Jason, but I think Malik Washington by far is a leader in the clubhouse to be the third receiver.
100%. I've been a huge fan of his. I love his return ability, whether it's a return game or, I know we're talking fantasy here, but if you are in one of those rare leagues that gives a little bit of, return yardage, all-purpose yardage, sure. But I've never seen him go down on a first hit. He is fighting for every single yard. He is a massively intelligent kid, got a master's degree in higher education. He is a leader. And even as early as the middle of last year, receivers in the room were talking about his professionalism. So I really have high hopes for Malik Washington this season.
Yeah. Another thing about Malik I like, Dave, I didn't mean to cut you off, but is his ability to get vertical for a small receiver. Saying not deep, but like in the air. He's got, I think, over a 40-inch vertical. He doesn't drop balls. Like his hands are strong. I remember that draft. He was like a top 100 player for me. I could not believe that they got him in the 6th round. Yeah, man, Malik, I'm all in.
I know. Last year I had Danny Kelly from The Ringer on my show, and we were talking pre-draft, and Malik Washington was a guy that he just couldn't stop talking about, and he was saying that he expected him to go in round 2 or 3. He was one of those guys that fell for kind of confusing. Like I remember watching the draft, being like, "Why is nobody taking Malik Washington yet?" So glad to hear he's getting some buzz out of Miami. I don't know if you saw my eyes kind of darting around. I moved him up a few spots in my rankings just as we were having that talk. So appreciate the insight.
You came to the right place, Dave. You came to the right place.
Love that. So, other than Malik, and we can go outside of the Dolphins, let's now people can get their pens out. The sleepers, the low, who are you seeing out there that could maybe not be a league winner, but could be a viable spot start and someone's not even expecting right now?
So I think this is one, George, what you said about kind of finding guys in that 5 to 8 round range. That's kind of where Ricky Pearsall is going. Sometimes he's fallen out a little bit later, but this was a guy 2 months ago that I was drafted in like round 12, round 13. I think he is such a good player. And it's tough what we do in fantasy football. We get so bogged down with the numbers and the analytics and the projections. And I think that's why Ricky Pearsall is such a good buy right now, because if you look analytically, there wasn't a lot to get excited about. You can compare what he did on a per route run basis and compare it to Juwan Jennings. And Juwan Jennings definitely looks like the better wide receiver, but that ignores all of the context about Ricky Pearsall literally getting a bullet through his chest in the preseason and then still coming back after missing the first 6 weeks. We see this all the time, right? Where rookies get injured in the preseason and then just basically take a 0 their rookie season. It is so hard to get up to speed after missing preseason, after missing those early weeks. We saw it last year with Roman Wilson. Mike Tomlin had a quote that just like really stays with me. They asked him mid-season, they said, "What's going on with Roman Wilson? We had big expectations for him and he's not doing anything at all." And he said, "Well, he got hurt in training camp and it's really hard to jump on a moving train." Well, Ricky Pearsall didn't just jump on a moving train. He jumped on that moving train and then basically took over as the conductor by the end of the season. It's just unbelievable what he was able to do. 18 weeks over the last 2 weeks of the season. And one of those, if you go back and watch that game against Detroit, they were treating him as the offensive focal point. He was getting end arounds. He was getting contested catch opportunities in the end zone. They were hitting him deep downfield. They were hitting him on in-breaking routes across the middle of the field. There isn't a route this guy can't run. And you guys know with the Mike McDaniel offense, you talked about it, no block, no rock. Ricky Pearsall can block as well, and coming from that Shanahan system, he can block and he can make plays after the catch, and those are two things that Shanahan drools over. So even before Deebo Samuel got traded, even before we got bad news about Brandon Ayuk's injury, before Juwan Jennings re-injured his calf, I was way in on Ricky Pearsall. He's starting to creep up draft boards now, but until he gets into like round 4 or 5, I'm going to keep drafting him because I think that's where he deserves to go.
Yeah, and they want to prove it. Remember, people were surprised how high they took him in the draft over some other guys,
Right.
moved out. So they're going to want to prove a point with him, and that matters. Teams do take that into account, definitely. All right, we talked about sleepers. How about some buyer beware? Be careful with the price tag. Give me some guys you're saying, I wouldn't go there.
All right, so I'll drop some heat on you guys because I hate when somebody's like, who's a guy to avoid, and then they give you like a 15th rounder that nobody's even drafting anyway. I'll give you guys a first rounder that I'm not drafting this year. Amon-Ra St. Brown, such a good player, and he was the per game wide receiver 5 last year. But this is another one of those where you're kind of looking beyond the raw production and target rate, which is the likelihood that a wide receiver pulls a target on a route that he runs. In 2021, it was 31st in the league. 2022, that jumped up to 3rd in the league. And that's, he's a volume-based player. So 3rd most targets per route run of any wide receiver in 2022. 2023, 5th most yards per route run or targets per route run of any receiver. Last year, that dropped down to 17th. And if you look at his expected fantasy points, which takes into account the amount of targets that he gets, where he gets them on the field, and where they are at on the field, Amon-Ra St. Brown actually would have been 17th in expected fantasy points last year. He made up for it, having the most touchdowns of his career by a large margin. And if you look at that game log last year, there were some very concerning games. He had a game where he had 2 catches for 7 yards, but he scored a touchdown. So people don't really care about it because you still got flex-worthy play out of him. But I think we're seeing a big shift in how Detroit wants to operate now. Jameson Williams is such a good player. And we saw last year that his usage started to grow over the second half of the year. Sam Laporta, very good rookie season, banged up for the first half of his season. But then we saw over the second half of last year, he started to emerge as well. So I don't think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is just going to completely fall off the cliff and be a useless player. But right now, where he's going in round 1, I've got him as a second-round pick, and it's really hard for me to justify taking Amon-Ra St. Brown over Devon Achane, who we talked about earlier, Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey, Drake London, some of these guys that are on the up-and-up right now. Amon-Ra St. Brown, great story. 4th-round pick, defied the odds, became the wide receiver 1 on a very good offense. But I think that now when you couple in the brain drain that happened in Detroit, lose their offensive coordinator, lose their wide receiver coach, basically lose every single coach on offense, and you look at the emergence of some of these young ascending players in the offense, it's just really hard for me to justify taking Amon-Ra St. Brown where he's going off the board as a top 10 pick.
That's good advice, and you've given a lot of great advice, but if you have to kind of lump everything for like maybe an elevator pitch worth of advice right now for everybody drafting, and drafts are starting in 10 days, the prime time of drafting is nearly here. So what would be your overall draft bucket of information that you're going to give out for advice?
So this is easier said than done, but I think the best thing you could do in a fantasy draft is just to take value early. And I think so many people go into drafts saying like, I've heard 0 running back is the way to draft. So I'm going to draft a 0 running back team, or I'm going to draft a 0 wide receiver team, or I'm going to reach for an elite quarterback or a tight end, whatever it is. I don't go into any draft with preconceived notions of what I want to do. You have to be as fluid as possible in those early rounds. So I've had some drafts where I've started off with 4 wide receivers. I've had other drafts where I've started off with 3 running backs and a tight end. I never really know what I'm doing in those early rounds. I have my top 36 ranked out, and I will just draft the best player available in those early rounds. And then based on what you do in the early rounds, that's when you devise your draft strategy. So for instance, let's say I start off running back, and then I get Trey McBride in round 3, and then there's another really good running back. Let's say Alvin Kamara is there in round 4. I think a lot of people would look at that strategy and say, there's no way this could possibly work, but you take the value early. And then what you do in rounds 5 through 10 is you just hammer wide receivers. And you hope that, 3 of those 5 wide receivers you draft can end up being flex plays by the end of the season. So just big picture strategy. Don't go into your draft with a strategy. Be as fluid as possible as you can in the early rounds, and then use those middle rounds to address the weaknesses that you weren't able to get early in your draft.
Great advice. That's funny you say that, because here's another one of my lines. I let the board speak to me. I do not go into preconceived rankings, and I always say I let the board talk. When I'm up, I'll see it, I'll know it. You know what I mean? Yep. And put a smile on your face, and put a smile on my face, because I always say that. And somebody like you who is all in on this, to hear them say that, it's like, wow, it's validated. It was like, I always say, let the board speak. And real drafts too. As a GM too, I think that's smart. I think these teams that are locked into their picks going into regular NFL draft, and they're not flexible to see what falls to them, and they already have preconceived, we're going with this guy. I hate that. So yeah, I agree. Let the board speak to you. Great point, Dave.
I'll double down. I agree with those points. Absolutely.
Yeah, like I said, easier said than done, but the best way to do that is to practice. So, you can mock draft, best ball drafts, whatever you want to do. I think the best way to kind of do that is, I'll even admit it, when I first started drafting this offseason, there's some player values that surprised me, and I would miss out on players that I want, or be forced to take players that I didn't want. If you do a handful of mock drafts or a handful of best ball drafts before your big draft, you'll start to kind of see where those pockets are that you want to attack different positions. So my advice, I said, kind of easier said than done. It kind of comes with practice. So I guess that would be my second point of advice, would be to do some mock drafts or do some best ball drafts before your big fantasy draft.
Now we got to touch on, for real quick, the auction participants. I love auction. I think that's one of the most pure and enjoyable drafts to, go out and get the 5 guys that you really want, but you could win an auction league with the dollar players. So who might be a dollar player or 2 that you are just circling and hoping that everyone else is depleted and you can just kind of select the guy and not have a bidding war?
So always those running backs that I mentioned earlier, Taj Brooks, Kyle Monangai is another guy. I think the public right now thinks that Roschon Johnson is the RB2 in Chicago, but it sure sounds like it's going to be Kyle Monangai. Blake Corum is another one, but I'll throw a receiver name out there, and he's an AFC East guy. Demario Douglas, I think, is so undervalued right now. Last year, he ran 5 times as many routes out of the slot as any other receiver did in New England, and he's going to maintain that role this year. I mean, all we're hearing out of New England is that he is going to be the slot receiver. We've seen historically the slot receiver in a Josh McDaniels offense gets peppered with targets, and I like Stephon Diggs, and it sounds like he's going to be healthy and ready for week 1, but right now, Demario Douglas is regularly getting drafted as the wide receiver 70 and beyond. He's inside my top 48. He's a guy I've been drafting in almost every single draft.
I'll hate to pick a Patriot, but I'm gonna have to circle that one.
You know what, Sarney? I can't tell you how much money I made back in the day because I was the only Chicago guy that wasn't afraid to draft Jordy Nelson. It's fun, and you don't want to do it, but I mean, if you're willing to take those guys on the rival teams in your home league, that's how you do it.
Once or twice I threw Santana Moss on a team, and I didn't want to. I hear you.
Well, he was a UM guy, so
that's true.
Quick question made me think: Is it a good or a bad thing when you start picking guys on the team that you root for? Is it like evaluating in a vacuum? Because sometimes I got caught up with that. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's something I've always struggled with.
It is tough. I think that everybody just naturally overvalues players on their own team. And I think me being outside of Chicago, I can take more of an objective look at the Bears. I've got my Bears wide receiver rankings are completely upside down from where everyone else is. Like Luther Burden is the guy that I want this year because I think he could be the slot player in Ben Johnson's offense, not getting the warm and fuzzies about DJ Moore. But I mean, I've been in, this is year 19 now that my home league is going on. All these guys are from Chicago, and I have just kind of accepted that I am never going to have a Chicago Bear on my roster in that team because all of my meatball buddies are going to reach for him rounds ahead of where I'm comfortable taking them. So I think that it's fun to have players on teams that you root for, but more often than not, like George, if you said you're living in Miami, if you're drafting with 11 of your buddies that are all living in Miami and all Dolphins fans, my big picture, my big picture advice would probably be to just avoid the Dolphins because people are going to pay up for all of them.
Yeah, agreed.
Very good point. And, let's go back to reality. We're going to ask you, like we ask all of our guests in the preseason, if you have a record prediction. You can give a Bears, you can give a Dolphins. What are those two teams' records if you're looking at your crystal ball?
Oh, man, you're asking me about two teams that I have projected to draft inside the top 8 next year. So, first of all, I'll give you the Bears one first, so you guys don't think that I'm out here just dogging on the Dolphins. I think the Bears are going 5-12 this year. Huge culture shift going underway right now, and I write the Bears beat reports, or the Bears training camp reports for Footballguys. So I listened to a dozen hours of podcasts over the weekend. I've read every single training camp report, and it sounds like they are treating Caleb Williams like a rookie. They don't have a single coach that they brought back from last year. And they said, what are you trying to build off of from last year? And Ben Johnson said, nothing. There's nothing to build on from last year. I mean, they are treating this guy like a rookie. It sounds like they've thrown around the term drinking out of a fire hose a lot, where they said that they are just throwing everything at him, kind of allowing him to sink or swim. Ben Johnson's coaching him really hard. That might translate to immediate success. But I think when you look at Chicago, Ben Johnson, Ryan Poles, Caleb Williams, they are all under contract through 2028. And they talk about how building a good team takes time. And I don't think there's any expectations that they're going to do something special this year. I think they're kind of just looking to build the foundation for Caleb Williams so they could have a better team going into 2026, 2027. So I've got them as a 5-win team. And then unfortunately, my record for the Dolphins is the same. I've got them at 5-12 as well. It's a tough division. They've got some really tough road matchups. There's a few, I think, easy wins on that schedule. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. I know they get the Saints. I think that'll be an easy win. I forget the Browns. I think the Browns.
Carolina. Yeah.
Browns, Carolina. I actually have them losing against Carolina in my projections. I'm sorry. I think they're going to be a better team than most realize.
Bryce Young love, huh?
I am, yeah. I think that Tedero McMillan really kind of puts a bow on that passing attack, pushes Xavier Legette into the slot role where he can kind of focus on his athleticism.
Big Legette guy coming out, yeah.
So I like Carolina this year. So I'm sorry, I don't want to sit here and dog on the Dolphins. I got them going 5-12 this year, but. Remember all the good things I said about Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle.
Hey, this is a fantasy show. Don't worry, you're in good company right now.
I'll tell you what, if they go 5-12, there's going to be a lot of new faces on the sideline and the front office. I will say, Dave, if Tua does stay healthy, I think I always say that he'll raise the floor. They're an 8 or 9 win team with the healthy Tua. Now, if he gets hurt, that's another story. It could be more what you said, but hopefully not the case. I know we appreciate you, Dave. This was unbelievable. I learned so much from this just one episode. I have a bunch of notes down. Jason, be ready for that draft. You're in trouble, man.
Oh no! If we're drafting next to each other, bad news, man.
But anyways, Dave, before you head out, let everybody know where they can find you and follow you and all the work you got going on with the Football Guys.
Yeah, real simple. Everything's over at Footballguys. I can't even give the list of shows that I'm doing right now. I'm doing 10 to 12 shows a week. I'm coming out with 3 to 5 articles a week. But if you just sign up, footballguys.com, you'll see all of the content that me and the rest of our staff is putting out over there.
Yeah, awesome, man. And hopefully we can do this again. We'll let you know our draft. We'll send you guys our draft. We'll send you, Dave, our draft.
We've actually got a Rate My Team feature at Footballguys. It's totally free. You don't even need to be a subscriber or anything like that. But you can put your entire team in there. It'll tell you how your team did, and it'll even look ahead at bye weeks and say that really? You've got this player on bye in week 8. This player is a good matchup in week 8, so pick him up to set yourself up. I mean, one of the best features that we have, if you just search Footballguys Rate My Team, it is completely free, and I'd recommend doing it after every single one of your drafts.
Oh, yeah, definitely. 100%. We're going to check it out. Our draft's next Saturday, a little early. So wish us luck, Dave, and thank you so much. Go follow Dave at Footballguys. Find all his tons of work. He's tremendous. I watched a couple of his shows preparing for this show today. So don't forget to follow him, follow us, hit that subscribe button here. We will be back on Wednesday, guys, for Jason, for Dave, for myself. Fins up, guys. We're out.
Thank you, Dave.